affected by this in a big way today. And a lot of my work focuses on understanding how and where industries are in this shift today. There are typically 3 different categories of industries that I would think of, which are at various stages in their roadmap towards being transformed into platforms. So the first category of industries are what I would think of as information-intensive industries, where the principal value that is delivered to the consumer is information-intensive. So if you think of media, it's a highly information-intensive industry, and that's why they're in a lot of trouble because of the internet, because a lot of traditional media business models have converted into platform business models today. TV is facing a lot of competition from YouTube. Newspapers are facing a lot of competition from Medium and other forms of blogging platforms. So one of the first indicators of whether an industry is going to be hit by platforms is how information-intensive that particular industry is. Another example is telecommunications and specifically the handset industry, because the value of a handset was not so much in the hardware as in the software that was on the handset. And by making that a platform, Apple ensured and Android ensured that the whole industry was disrupted. So information-intensive industries are the first to get disrupted when platforms come into the picture. Or if I were to put a positive spin on it, they are the first to find opportunities for transformation when platforms come into the picture. Which brings us to a second category of industries, which are also information-intensive, but they are heavily regulated. So the reason these industries take more time getting disrupted is because regulation prevents a platform model from taking hold in a big way with the mass market. And secondly, a lot of these industries also have really high costs of transaction failure. So if you're creating an alternate market of producers and consumers interacting with each other, and if any of those interactions fail, the cost of failure is just too high. Banking is a classic case of such an industry. Healthcare is another example of such an industry. If you think of both banking and healthcare and even education, all of these are information-intensive industries at the end of the day. We often think of healthcare as a services industry, but healthcare is actually services delivered purely around the idea of patient data. So whoever has the patient data knows what kinds of services will best be delivered to the patient, and in that process owns the outcomes that should be taking place in that industry. But traditionally, healthcare has always worked like a pipe. It's always seen the insurance company as the customer, not the patient as the customer. And as a result, it's always captured data that is relevant to the insurance company. It's never captured data that is relevant to the patient. And what we're seeing today is healthcare is fundamentally shifting away from this traditional model of pipes to a model of customer-centered ecosystems where all healthcare firms realize that there is no one healthcare firm that can provide an end-to-end solution to a customer. And so they need to come together in an ecosystem format in some way to solve this end-to-end problem. And it's actually very interesting if you look at what's happening in the healthcare industry today. 5 different types of companies which were never competing with each other in the past are suddenly competing with each other. At one end, we have the hospitals who are getting a lot of data about customers because of movement to electronic health records. At the other end, we have somebody like Apple or Google who's also getting into health, again getting at it from the data side. On the third side, we have pharmacies like Walgreens, which have a lot of data about the patient again. And then on the fourth side, we have the pharmaceutical companies themselves trying to get a lot of this data because eventually they want to ensure that they understand the patient better as well. And on the fifth end of it, we have consumer goods companies like Philips that are coming into this game, creating wearables, Nike, again creating wearables, trying to get into this game again of providing an end-to-end outcome for the patient. All of them are trying to fight for the same pool of patient data. Whoever owns that patient data is going to own the customer-centered ecosystem that's going to solve the problem in the future. And that's what's really playing out in the healthcare industry today, especially over the last 2 to 3 years. So that's an example of an industry that was waiting to be disrupted, heavily regulated, and now is facing a lot of the pressures that are likely to move it towards a platform model. The final category of industries that get affected by platforms are what I would think of as resource-intensive industries. Because as I mentioned in the beginning, pipes always fight on the basis of their unique access to resources. So if you think of a mining company, you don't hear of a lot of startups getting into mining because mining is very difficult to start up in because there's a lot of upfront cost involved in prospecting, for example. Oil and gas, again, it's very difficult to start up over there. So resource-intensive industries have always been extremely resistant to the onslaught of digitization. But what's happening today, very interestingly, is because of the Internet of Things and because of the democratization of technologies in the form of 3D printing, for example, resource-intensive industries are getting digitized as well. And the moment resource-intensive industries get digitized, they become data industries, they become information industries. So think of the kinds of implications it can have. If you are a mining company, today you can connect all the equipment in your mine to a central platform in a way that you do not need to send people into the mine. It has very interesting implications from there. If you do not need to send people into the mine, you can start mining in all kinds of places that you would not have mined in the past. Moreover, the moment you've connected all of these machines centrally to a platform, you can start benefiting from the initial idea that I shared about Uber, which is your middle management can be replaced by algorithms, because all the information that needs to be processed in a mine is within a very specific context. And that's increasingly happening in the top mining companies today. Most importantly, when all of this data comes onto a central platform, you can open out this prospecting data to a larger ecosystem of startup mines who then will not have to spend so much time in prospecting. They would just use your data, mine that data to figure out what is the unique kind of mining activity that they would want to get involved in. And so a whole range of opportunities are opening up in an industry as traditional as mining today because of platforms, purely because digitization has hit this industry over the last 2 to 3 years in particular. So broadly, depending on where you are in this whole spectrum, there are various ways in which platforms will be affecting your firm, whether it's in the extremely information-intensive side, heavily regulated side, or resource-intensive side. There are different ways in which platforms are affecting what's happening in the industry. There are different timelines that the traditional firms may have to transform themselves, and there are different advantages that new emerging firms may have to disrupt these industries as a basis of the idea of